An entire world is ready for you to start your career teaching the path to wellness.
Mastering the science of mindfulness.
And the art of coaching.
To help clients achieve mental, emotional, and physical betterment of life.
Through movement,
nutrition,
recovery, and regeneration.
Because impacting one person impacts a family.
Impacting a family impacts a community.
And impacting a community impacts the world.
Become an NASM certified wellness coach.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts here with Ken Miller. Ken, how are you today?
Awesome.
Yes.
How are you?
Living a dream,
That's
as always.
Yep.
As I said, I woke up, so it's a good day.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm excited about today because we're actually we're saying it's the evolution of physical education, but I think it's a little bit more than that because we're going to talk about where we started and kind of where physical education is today, which is, in my opinion, a little concerning, especially when we get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about.
Right. And I think, we can't talk about physical education or what we call PE back in the day, so, when it came to junior high, high school, when you actually had a former class relating to movement and you're led by a coach or your PE teacher or PE coach, because there you're trying to make that transition from, elementary school. You just go out and play. What do you have? You had a recess. And then you have junior high, high school, where you had an actual class relating to PE. So when I think physical education, just from my own experience, I just think about everybody had the same, our school colors in junior high were like burgundy, so it was burgundy. And so we had the burgundy shorts, the burgundy shirt, and then it had, K Miller on it.
Oh, yes.
So you had to have that the white little block out where you had to do that. So, but by the end of the week, I think we had PE every day when it came to junior high school. But then when we got to high school, we had, 4 days a week of PE. Right. So, but when, as you said, Wendy, it's a little concerning where we are today, because now if they have it at all, it's once, twice a week. Like my kids right now, they have motor fitness is what they call it. It's not even PE anymore. Motor fitness. They have that 1 day a week, and they're in elementary school still. So but they have their, lunchtime and playtime. But as far as the amount of physical activity they get on campus, it's one time a week with their coach.
Wow. So I know, I was a little jealous about your burgundy shorts. Mine were gray, like the actual boring gray with red lettering, and it said Bats in huge letters on the back. And so there wasn't multiple. I'm sure with Miller, it's very common. With Bats,
Mm-hmm.
not so much, but, and they were disgusting. By the time you would, people didn't want to sweat. And, I'm thinking my kid is 5 and he is in kindergarten, and they have 30 minutes of recess every day. 30 minutes at 5. So keep that in mind. That's pretty crazy, because he goes to school. They start at 7:40 and they go until 3, I think. They get released at like 2:45 or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's not a lot of, quote, playtime when you think about that for a 5-year-old in comparison. And I remember the first day of school, he came home and I was like, buddy, what's wrong? How was your first day? And he's like, we only got to play outside for just a small period. And then I had to sit there inside, and I was like, well, buddy, that's called learning. It's not just sitting there.
Right.
But it's actually disturbing, because he's used to playing all day, and then he goes into kindergarten, and just knowing that now we're in 30-minute sessions a day, it's pretty sad. And
it's very sad.
Yeah.
Because and I'll tell you one thing about my kid. Let's share kid stories right now. I open up his lunchbox, and it's like, dude, you only ate half of your sandwich. And he's like, yeah, I don't finish it because I don't have enough time to play. Mm-hmm. So lunchtime is a break, and it's the same for us, right? When we were growing up, but was a break between, okay, you ate and then you just go out into the courtyard and you played. But he wants to play so much. And again, he only has 1 day a week of motor fitness. and which means the only other time they have to play is they have one break and then they have lunchtime. So he sacrifices eating lunch. So he'll get enough so he's not hungry. But then he'll try to budget most of that time towards playing. So yeah, it is really sad when you have these kids who are meant to move, and again, they have to go to school, they have to learn something, but at some point in time, you're like, okay, if a school doesn't require PE, when do they move? When are they going to move and sweat? Because I don't know about you, Wendy, but I was that kid that after PE, because we would have to run this obstacle course on the cage once a week. And I'd be that kid that I'd run and I just sweat. Even as a kid, I was just big sweaty mess. Even though you take off your gym clothes, take a shower, I'm still sweating. So that next class right after PE, I am still sweating. So I was that sweaty little kid who after PE or after lunch, I go back to my seat going,
That's interesting. Yeah. Because I'm trying to think, well, those of you guys that are just joining Ken Miller and myself on Random Fit, we're talking about the evolution of physical education. Right now, we're just sharing stories. And so we were talking about our kids. So just one thing about my child too, when you were talking about lunch, is he comes home with a ton of food too. And he says he doesn't have time to eat. And for the same reason, he's a social butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the time where they can talk. And so he wants to be with his friends. So I feel your pain on that. But then listening to your story about when I was in school, we didn't have it every day. We did not have PE. We had our crazy gray outfits. We went in and I had PE second period. So I would go in, we had our homeroom. I went to my first class and then I had PE, and I had it, obviously we would change, our clothes with the females. And most of the people did not want to actually do anything. And it wasn't that they were not happy with what the coach was having us do or the teacher was having us do that day, whether it was kickball or soccer or something along those lines. They didn't want to get sweaty and smell the rest of the day. And so therefore they didn't exert the physical, like the whole purpose of PE class because of that reason. But see, we didn't get a chance to shower. It was like you just kind of did the, wipe down, pray that you have extra deodorant, put that all the sprays on so you smell terrible, BO with a scent of, cherry blossom or whatever it was. And then you went to the rest of the day. And so, when I think when we're talking about this, I understand the concerns that because you want to fit in, you don't want to be the stinky girl. Like, who wants to be stinky?
Yeah, you don't want to be the stinky guy either.
Right. But yeah, so I mean, when we actually get into what we're talking about, and I promise we're going to get there. I think it's important to let's talk about, when we talk about the evolution of physical education, which is the whole point of today. I mean, we have to start with the Greeks. And me being 50% Greek.
There you go.
And if you guys have ever seen my big fat Greek wedding, it's always from the Greeks, So we're going to start there. And, and you got to think, this is like when I look at history, physical education dates back starting with the Greeks. And what they were trying to do around the age of 7 was already start building athletes and building soldiers to get them prepared for war and chariot races and all the things that you see. If you saw Gladiator, look at me with my movies. It's all about getting people ready. I mean, I know they were the Romans, but whatever. So same thing. But they started at 7, and it was very, very important that everybody was involved.
Right. I guess with any of those ancient cultures, with ancient culture, you had a lot of physical activity built in because you had to survive. Everything was manual labor. So movement was never an issue. But when they started the Olympics, there was now purpose for sport and play and training, so that, and you brought up, raising, you raise your offspring to, be ready for war, because that's the environment that they lived in. They had to physically be ready to march, to throw, hand-to-hand combat. But then when we started looking at, this is one of the things I learned in the history of PE, physical education class, is that when we talk about sport and training, when you had the Olympics, when they started the Olympics, now there was a general use for, and purpose behind picking up heavy rocks, being able to run and throw and all of those things. But When we talk about the U.S., again, the U.S. is nowhere near the age of the cultures of Greeks, what the Greeks started. But going back to now, Dwight D. Eisenhower and then JFK, as far as their evaluation and the health and wellness and fitness of the U.S. population, because during Dwight D. Eisenhower's time, there was a concern: are Americans fit for war? Are they able to defend our country? For all the things that you have to do in battle. So that was a big part of his mission to get the United States or American youth and kids, back into shape, because not only was there a question about their ability to, be good soldiers from a physical standpoint, but also from that point in time, there was surveys done and research done on the current state of health and fitness of Americans, and we were not doing that well, right? Even back then in the 40s and the 50s, they were already identifying that Americans were fatter, right? They were thicker in the midline, right? Across the waist. So the midsection was expanding. They were not fit, right? So they were not in good shape compared to generations prior. And already back then in the 40s, it was already a concern. So now, there was a push or just a built up awareness enough to where they started committees to address, okay, what are we going to do to get Americans back into shape, right? And then the topics of, okay, let's start them young, and now let's go ahead and get them to where we should be, not just from building strong and fit soldiers, but just being American, just being the United States. We need to be healthier than what the trend was showing even back then.
Yes. And those of you guys that are just joining Ken Miller and myself on Random Fit, we're talking about the evolution of physical education. And of course, we were talking that it started with the Greeks, and then we have, Eisenhower that was like, what, we need to prepare our soldiers and get everyone physically fit. And then I think it's important to really talk a lot about John F. Kennedy, because, he was a huge advocate for physical education, not only during his, 35th presidency, but also prior to that. And he's the one that started that White House committee, for health and fitness. He started really trying to bring in a lot of government officials to these committees to take it back to their home states, and talk about integrating physical fitness into schools. And so, he was 100% invested in trying to get our country healthy. And I think, when you think of that, some people don't really associate him with physical education, but to me, he was the one that really brought it to the forefront. And, with also trying to teach the children and our teachers and our coaches the importance of human movement, our body in general, what nutrition can do. So, right, the right fuel to fire, doing different types of sports. And so I think, when we need to credit him a lot with what's happening, but unfortunately, we're not making it that big of a priority today, because we're looking at funding. We're looking at the amount of teachers. We're so hard about academics, we're teaching, the things that my 5-year-old is learning, I'm like, man, I didn't learn that until I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade, because they're really starting to force them and learning things quicker at a younger age, and then getting to AP courses by the time they're in high school, which I can see a lot of benefit. We want that for our children. But if we don't include physical education, and this is what I read in so much of the stuff that we covered, for this topic, education is what stimulates our brain. Movement is what stimulates our brain, and it helps with children that have ADHD and ADD. And so when you put the two together, if we had more movement, we would look better, feel better, move better, but we're also going to think better.
Yeah, totally. And I think that is, going back to, our kids and what we see today, like right now, it's just one day a week of a formal physical education class with guided leadership from the teacher. But, they're so starved for that recess, right? And again, that's just natural instinct to where like what you and I both said, with our kids, it's like They would rather sacrifice eating
Mm-hmm.
for movement. What does that tell you? Right. But, and, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, because there's lack of movement. And as parents, if you're paying attention to your kids and their ability to focus, like you said, because that's the thing, right? If you have all this energy, you're thinking about, when am I going to get out? When am I going to move? When can I have a chance to play? You don't have that opportunity. So that's where your mind is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, just as a side note, I take my kid out, we play catch for a little while, and then he's better at reading the books. But one point I want to make is with my kids, we have them involved with extracurricular sports and activities, because they, for as much sitting as they do, especially with the lockdown and COVID and all those things that brought us home, they were away from school. We needed an outlet. So this is where we were almost, maybe, if you can look at it, maybe we were hyper aggressive about getting them outside, because here they are, their only relationship and socializing is with a computer and whoever pops up on their screen. But this is where, getting them in the pool, getting them to throw a ball, some kind of ball sport, so they can work on some tracking, eye tracking and movement and hand-eye, foot-eye coordination, because it wasn't happening, in school that frequently to begin with. Now, let alone you're now, you're distance learning.
Mm-hmm.
So you're deprived of all that. So and I notice, to a pretty good extent, their ability to do better in school when they had more sport and activity. And that's, it's a sad state of affairs when what, in our opinion, or my opinion, should be built into their, their schoolwork, or somewhere embedded within their schoolwork, like I had, like you had, that they just don't get into. They can't sit all day. So the need for PE in school, unfortunately, as you said, funding, if something's got to give, it's going to be the arts usually, and physical education falls by that way, when there's so much focus on science and math and English, all the things we need. I'm not taking that away, but to facilitate learning those topics, we need to get kids to move.
Well, it's super important. And if you look at like some of the top reasons, when I was looking up some of the stuff, it's like, okay, it helps with anxiety and depression. And
Yep.
unfortunately, we're seeing that
Exactly.
so much in our youth because of some of the unfortunate situations that have happened in the last few years. But we're seeing an increase in depression, which is really scary, but a decrease in physical education. It also helps, when you're thinking about focus and concentration. We've got more, and maybe now because it's recognized, it wasn't really talked about when I was younger, even though it's always been a thing, but the ADD, ADHD, that kind of, where your child is now getting diagnosed with these things. But, that's something. You've got health and growth and development. And like you said, it's actually developing social skills, being on the playground and playing with their friends. They're learning how to deal with social environments, and, something doesn't go wrong. How do you deal with, something that doesn't go your way? How do you handle things? So I think, just teaching life skills is important. And we learn that on the playground. I mean, we really do start at a young age. And so when we're starting decreasing that, but, and I know we can talk about like so many different things, but the one thing I found interesting, I mean, I found a lot of things interesting. No, I shouldn't say the one thing.
Yeah.
But one thing that it was I was taken back by, that there's only 6 states in the United States that actually have a legal requirement or a requirement for PE in schools. Not really legal, but a requirement. Only 6 out of 50, y'all. 6. And those 6 were Illinois, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New York, and Vermont.
Well, there you go.
None of the states that I live in. Just saying. And when I say that, it was from kindergarten to 12.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. All throughout. Yeah. Which is amazing. I mean, kudos to those states, right? They understand the importance. Plus, someone in the decision making, in the administration of those states said, my kid just goes nuts when they don't work out or when they don't play. So forget it. I'm putting it in there from K through 12, because I don't want to have to go home to some kid who's got all this bound up energy, can't study, can't focus. So we're going to put PE in there. Yeah. So that, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, how many states we got? 50 plus the, Puerto Rico and,
Do we
you
need to
know,
take you back to school? Maybe you missed that when you went to your
maybe I was doing
PE
PE too much there.
period. Or maybe because you weren't focused and
I wasn't
concentrating. It could
focused, I'll
go
blame
both
that.
ways. But one thing that I thought was interesting, do you want to talk a little bit? And those of you guys that are just joining us, Ken Miller and I on Random Fit are talking about the evolution of physical education. And of course, we talked about like some situations that we've dealt with. We talked a little bit about the Greeks and then how we didn't even bring it into, really focus on PE until the mid 19th century. And then how John F. K kind of made it more of a known thing, brought it into our schools, really focused on physical education. And then we talked about the 6 states that actually have PE from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. But now let's talk about Finland.
No, let's talk about the Finns.
Let's talk about the Finns.
Now, I think if there's any template to look at, if we're going to change and modify and look at, okay, well, how can we improve? You just look at Finland and their emphasis just by how much time that they want you to move, right? Because what was it, Wendy, about 3 hours a
Yes.
week? Yeah. I mean,
well, I don't even know if it was a week. I think
it's a day.
we're looking at, in the new curriculum, they're looking at 2 to 3 hours a week with more outdoor activities, which I think is really, and we don't even do, I mean, we're lucky to get an hour because 30 minutes, they're saying 30 minutes or so twice a week. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So they are targeting, they are looking at kids moving more. So if you can, I mean, but here's the thing. What I took away from reading about Finland is that they want the kids outside, right? It's not inside the gym. They want them outside. And I don't know about you, Wendy, but from what I understand about Finland, so for all of you Finnish listeners, please help educate us on how you grew up and how physical education was a part of your day. But the fact that they want you to be outside, and again, if it's cold outside, when you look at winter sports, Winter Olympics as it's coming up, these guys do awesome in competitions because they are basically born to be outside when it comes to how they've been exposed to physical activity. So, also having shown proven results on academics, how, again, if you're from that part of the world, every person that I met from that part of the world, just some of the smartest people I've met actually from Norway, from Finland. So there is something to their academic prowess, if you will, if that's any relation to how much movement that they do, because the government has said, okay, you guys are going to move and you guys are going to move outside as much as you can. And in turn, they've figured out that, okay, they move more, they get outside more from a fitness standpoint, and it's integrated into how they teach, right? And what they teach, as you're talking about, Wendy, socialization, teamwork, things like that. Those are all the things that have gone into, their success academically. So it's not just an accessory or something that can be cut because it's like, that's not as important as studying, the sciences, but they know that it has directly affected how they absorb that information. And that's one of the reasons why I say, if anything, if there's any country that has had the more robust support for physical education, it is Finland.
Well, and I want to actually make a comment because I messed up. So I was looking at the notes, and for children that are 8 and under, they do 3 hours of a physical movement a day. A day. 3 hours
right.
a day. And then after that point, they start incorporating it more in their curriculum for 3 hours per week in their newer curriculum. But, if you think about it, they started doing children health clinics and everything since the 1940s. And so when you're looking at them, Finnish are they had the highest academic results in the school children and development on a development standpoint as well. So, they're more fit. And when you're thinking about academics, they're actually more successful. And so, when you're looking into what they do on a day-to-day basis and how they're incorporate some of these movements, aside from, the 3 hours a week, they're also removing desks. They're blending movement with traditional learning. So they're having to move around and do different things like that. They're teaching them about early development, nutrition, any kind of abnormal conditions. They're looking at those at a very young age to help find support. And that's things that we really should take note of, because, when we think about the States, we always say, oh, we're the best. And there's so many wonderful things about this country. So I 100% agree with that. And of course, I live here. So of course, wherever I live, it's the best. But there are so many things we can take from other countries that are doing things better. And I think it's really looking at our youth, trying to decrease the obesity rates, because as you and I both know, Ken, and what we do for a living, it's scary to see the diabetes numbers in children. And it's not because they're born diabetics. It's because, unfortunately, they're overweight, they're sedentary, they're not doing some of these things to live a healthy lifestyle. And they're not even in junior high yet, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah. I mean, what used to be called adult onset diabetes actually doesn't apply anymore because of the word adult, when it's hitting so many of our youth. And if you think about it, it's like those precious few moments, so if the class was an hour, we spend about 45 minutes, 40 minutes or so moving. And if you're only going to do that 3 days a week formally, right, then that's not meeting the, the requirements that we look at to maintain health. Right. So that way you can't really, especially minus those 6 states that require it from K through 12. So we're talking about 54 other states that you're left up to your own devices. You can't trust or depend on PE courses, classes, to get the minimum amount of movement a day or even the week. So from that vantage point, we do have to, I guess one of the things that I think we should take away from here is that when you look at the state of affairs, when it comes to the emphasis on movement and exercise, we can't depend, and I'm not making a political statement here, but all I'm saying is that we as parents or anybody that's responsible for the health and wellness of any child in this country, we can't depend on the current system to give the child what they need for movement, right? So you have to take it upon yourself, whatever that manner is, whether it's you taking the kids to the park, you enrolling them in swim class or some kind of team-based sport, then that's what it takes to get our kids moving. But as you're saying, Wendy, when it comes to the rates of diabetes in our youth, that's just a reflection of we don't have good eating habits, definitely, and we don't have good movement habits. And again, for all the reasons that supports the learning process, we're not doing good with what we put into our mouth, and we're not doing well with how we move our bodies. So when we talk about the evolution of physical education, not to leave it on a negative point, but I guess what we're trying to do today is just bring up awareness that when it comes to PE in the school system, we have to take a good look at, what's available to us and what we need to do to augment what our country and our kids of this nation need.
Well, and I think that's a pretty good way to wrap it up. I mean, all in all, if we can't change what's going to be offered in schools, then maybe there's some stuff that we can do on the outside that's only going to help, psychologically. It's going to help emotionally, and physically. So I think the extra activities and things that you can try to get your kid doing outside of school, if we can't implement it, because it doesn't seem like that's going to be changing anytime soon. But
No, but it starts with us, right?
It does. It starts on Random Fit.
Yeah, it starts on Random Fit. Today, we got it right here.
Today, it's starting. So, today was fun. Thanks for all your information, as always.
And thank you, Wendy, as always, from me. Anyway, so from Random Fit, Wendy Batson, me, Ken Miller, thank you for listening. And if you like what you had to listen to today, hopefully you did, because I got a lot out of it. Like, follow, subscribe, comment, let us know what you like and what other things that we can talk about on Random Fit, and we'll do that for you. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.